Good evening, folks, and welcome to the live stream. I hope you're all very well this evening. I hope you had a nice week. So what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, there's a possibility of a coalition government in the future. Is Reform UK left-wing? And Donald Trump seems to be wanting to destroy the economy even further by, well, taking away powers from the federal government, or not the Federal Reserve, I should say. So replacing the head of the Federal Reserve with somebody, well, he agrees with. So let's jump into the first story, which is that and hear what they have to say.
Something that Powell has been bracing for since literally hours after Trump was reelected in November, and it's something that the president did not rule out today.
Oh, he'll leave. If I ask him to, he'll be out of there.
Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
If I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast, believe me.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
Pretty straightforward. Our panel joins us now. CNN legal analyst Elliot Williams, publisher and editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report, Amy Walter, Democratic strategist, former finance chair for the Harris 2024 presidential campaign, Rufus Gifford, and CNN political commentator, Republican strategist, Brad Todd. And we also have with us today Maggie Haberman of the New York Times. She is also a CNN political analyst. Maggie, I want to start with you. I'm very grateful.
Okay, before we start with Maggie, is the audio okay? Seems to be a problem with the audio. Hopefully it's all fine now. What's the problem here? The problem is that the Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent. So the government is responsible for economic policy, while the Federal Reserve is responsible for audio's fine, good. Federal Reserve is responsible for, the money, making sure that there's enough money in the economy, making sure that, if it's necessary to print more money or whatever, to buy bonds, to sell bonds, to buy bonds, whatever. That's the job of the Federal Reserve. I'm not an expert on these things, but it's important to have the Federal Reserve independent from the government. Remember when Liz Truss was Prime Minister and she started blaming the Bank of England. So imagine if the Bank of England was under the control of Liz Truss. Okay, so thankfully the Bank of England was not under the control of Liz Truss, but can you imagine if she had decided to put Kwasi Kwarteng or someone like that in charge of the Bank of England? This is exactly what Donald Trump wants to do. He wants to take away the independence of the Federal Reserve and put one of his sycophants in charge. So he can just tell them, reduce interest rates or raise interest rates or whatever at the drop of a hat. And this would, of course, create a massive amount of uncertainty because, once again, Donald Trump is creating a massive amount of uncertainty, but at least the Federal Reserve is independent, so it doesn't have to do what Donald Trump says. Now, Donald Trump and the federal government have influence over the Federal Reserve. They can put pressure, they can demand, they can ask the Federal Reserve to either increase or lower interest rates. But can you imagine a situation where Donald Trump, one of Donald Trump's sycophants, is in charge of the Federal Reserve? Then they would do whatever Donald Trump says. And Donald Trump, it seems, wants the world to move away from the US dollar as the reserve currency, because this would, in a sense, make exports cheaper. He wants to drive down the cost of the dollar, to weaken the dollar, because if the dollar is weakened, then it's easier to export. But then that's a problem, because the US imports a lot of things. So if you have a weak dollar, everything that you're importing is going to become more expensive. And this is part of Donald Trump's plan of, well, we're going to crash the economy in a sense so that we can increase manufacturing. We can bring manufacturing back if we lower the value of the dollar. But as we saw recently, what happened was bond yields increased because the US dollar is no longer a safe currency, or people were not considering it a safe currency. So they were deciding, actually, we're not going to buy into US debt. We're actually going to go in the opposite direction. We're going to go and buy European debt, or we're going to buy Japanese debt instead. I bet Trump is the bank during the game of Monopoly, yes. Anyway, let's continue with what these have to say.
to have you join the show. The Wall Street Journal is just out reporting that we're going to attribute the reporting to them here at CNN. We don't have it independently ourselves. But he said the Journal reports that Trump has spoken with Kevin Warsh, he's a former Fed governor, about potentially firing Powell and then before his term ends, and then possibly selecting Warsh to be his replacement. The reporting says Warsh has advised against firing Powell, argued he should let the Fed chair complete his term without interference. He, of course, has about a year left on it. I realize, obviously, you're reporting maybe in a different place on this, but I'm hoping you can kind of help us understand what has happened between Donald Trump and Jerome Powell that is driving all of this.
Jerome Powell is not doing what Donald Trump wants, which is to lower rates. Trump is watching rates get cut elsewhere, and so Trump is doing what Trump does, which is engage in a pressure campaign publicly. This is going to test the limits of what Trump is able to do. Now, Casey, the people that I have spoken to who are in touch with President Trump about this and are having conversations with him about it say he is not imminently going to try to push out Jerome Powell, bearing in mind that this is Donald Trump and things could change day to day.
Exactly. When Donald Trump says he's not going to do something, he probably does it the very next day. If Donald Trump says he will do something, he probably won't do it. So there's no point saying, okay, well, what Donald Trump has said. We have to look at what he's going to do. Now, hopefully he won't go down this road, because once again, this would be extremely damaging to the US economy. And as we know, when the US sneezes, we all catch cold. So this would be extremely problematic. Once again, the Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent. If Donald Trump puts one of his guys in charge, it will be somebody who will just do as is told. He will be a yes man. So there's the independence of the Federal Reserve will come to an end. Ivan, thank you so much for that super chat. The UK has got first-hand experience of the Bank of England being under government control before it became independent. Trump's idea for the Fed would be very bad. It would be a very bad move. The problem here is Trump. If the Federal Reserve was under the control of the government, that's not per se a terrible thing. It's better if it's independent. There are problems with it being independent because, as we see with the Bank of England, the Bank of England's goal is just to hit inflation of 2%. It doesn't care how you achieve that. But sometimes, there may be a period when you say, look, we want to deal with a higher inflation because we want to see higher wages, for example. So we're willing to see inflation rise, and then the Bank of England don't want to go down that road. So if the Bank of England is under the control of the government, that can be a good thing, but it can also be a terrible thing. And in the case of Donald Trump, it's an absolutely terrible thing because Donald Trump doesn't care about the average worker. He's not. His control of the Bank of America, in this case the Federal Reserve, would be just to play around with the interest rates. There are no checks and balances for this felon. No, there are not. Thanks, Ivan, and thanks, Frederick. Yes, look, as I mentioned before on the channel, we're into uncharted territory here. Donald Trump is not acting within the rules. When it came to the Supreme Court ruling there last week, 9-0, in order to instruct the government to try and reach out to El Salvador to try and bring that guy back, Garcia, who was wrongfully sent to El Salvador. And the Trump response was, no, we won the case. 9-0. No, you did not. You lost the case 9-0. So you are instructed to facilitate his return, or at least pressure the El Salvadorian government to bring him back, to send him back to the United States. But Donald Trump is ignoring the Supreme. This is the problem here. Donald Trump is ignoring the Supreme Court. We keep hearing about how the Constitution is the most powerful thing that the U.S. Citizens have. Any president who runs roughshod over the Constitution, well, we can hold it up and the Supreme Court will protect the Constitution. No, the Constitution is worthless at this stage because Donald Trump is not respecting the Constitution. He's not respecting the Supreme Court. And nobody can do anything about it. You can't engage in a citizen's arrest. U.S. Marshals can't be sent to arrest Donald Trump because who's responsible for the US Marshals? It's the Department of Justice. And Trump's sycophants are running the Department of Justice, because the founding fathers probably believed, or when a lot of these institutions were set up, they believed that the government would operate within the law, and if the president didn't act within the law, the government would remove him. But Donald Trump, in this stage, in this situation, is in charge of the government. He filled the government with people who just agree with him on everything, who are afraid of him or just sycophants, and they're not in a position to remove him because it's not in their interest to remove him. A military coup now. I think this is probably the only way, because what's to stop, and I mentioned this before, what's to stop Donald Trump from cancelling the elections? What he says there won't be any elections. Well, we don't need them. He could say that. And what would happen? Well, people would protest, people would complain, the Democrats would throw a hissy fit, but that's all that would happen. Nothing would change. I'm not saying the people shouldn't try and protest or anything like that, but we're in a situation where Donald Trump could literally cancel the elections, the midterms or the next presidential election. He could cancel it, and there's nothing anyone could do about it, because the rules were written for normal people. The rules were written where a president would respect the rule of law, where Congress would be able to take power away from the president if it got out of hand. But it's broken at this stage.
Day. They are well aware in the White House that the markets are struggling, and they are well aware of what the last 2 weeks have looked like for this administration.
See, just Sarah says an armed militia, but you'd be going up against the US military. There's nothing, because Trump is commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Like the armed forces pledge allegiance to the Constitution, to respect the Constitution. So it would have to be them that would remove Donald Trump. But at the moment, we're not hearing anything like that.
So while Trump is frustrated and is going to say this publicly, there is an effort to try to keep him from doing this. And just again to note, Casey, yes, I'm sure he has had some kind of a conversation like that with Kevin Warsh. I'm sure Kevin Warsh advised him, as the Journal is reporting, but I do not believe Donald Trump is looking to do this today. He has been talking about firing the Fed chair going back to his first term. It's nothing new.
Right, which is why, of course, Powell felt like he had to come out and say that.
Yeah, but what Donald Trump did in his first term is different to what Donald Trump is doing now. Donald Trump was surrounded in his first term by people who were not wonderful people, but much better than the ones he's surrounded with now. So, but he's completely unshackled. At least in his first term, there were some adults in the room. Now he's the adult in the room, and that's not a good sign. How would the army feel if Mike Pence was in charge? They can make it happen. They are obliged to act. We'll have to wait and see. I thought the military are the defenders of the Constitution. Yes, they are. They are the defenders of the Constitution. The military do not pledge allegiance to the president. They pledge an allegiance to the Constitution. They're supposed to uphold the Constitution. Now, Donald Trump is not respecting the Constitution. He's not respected the First Amendment or the Second Amendment. Well, the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. The First Amendment, the right to free expression, free speech. He's not respecting that. Pence is a Christian nationalist. Aim higher. Mike Pence doesn't give a crap. Mike Pence shook Donald Trump's hand when Mike Pence's wife would not. Like, Mike Pence's wife has more integrity than Mike Pence. Mike Pence was almost murdered by Donald Trump's sycophants, and he still shook Donald Trump's hand. Can you imagine? Imagine being almost murdered by someone, and then you have to go into work the next day and shake their hand, in front of the cameras. That'd be pretty terrible, wouldn't it? But your wife saying, "No, I'm not going to do it." Fuck that. What are they waiting for? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But see, there's also a problem. Donald Trump has replaced a lot of the top brass in the US military with people who agree with him. So even if the military were to try and overthrow the president, the people at the top would need to be on board, and the people at the top probably aren't on board. Notice when Donald Trump took over, he sacked a load of people. You know, his government departments were downsized. Elon Musk came in and sacked a lot of federal employees, but also a lot of top military people were replaced. And some of these are career guys. They don't care about the Constitution. They just care about what can I get out of this. A military coup would not originate from the high-ranking officers who have too much to lose, but disgruntled mid-rank ones. That's interesting. The only thing he respects is his reflection. Max, he sacked all the JAGs, which advised the army. Yes, I remember. I actually covered that on a video. I think I uploaded the video. Yeah, there was the JAGs, who are these lawyers who represent the military, but also advise the military officers on what's legal and what's not legal. And Trump sacked a lot of those. So, you know, if something is illegal, you just sack the people who say that it's illegal, and then you can do what you want. I don't like Trump, but yet to be convinced he's any worse than George Bush Jr. Trump is talking about going to war with Iran. So, and Bush Jr. wasn't sending people to a foreign gulag. So we have that. But I'm no supporter of George Bush Jr. No, George W. Bush, he was terrible, and I was shocked at how his reputation had been resuscitated after he left office. Who remembers WMDs? Yes, lying about Iraq, convincing people that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Go back to 2003 and have a look at what was going on then. Where was it? Colin Powell lied to the United Nations about the situation. It was about convincing the public that it was necessary to go to war with Iraq. And unfortunately, the mainstream media went along with it because they were afraid that they would lose their jobs if they didn't bang the drum for war. Anyway, guys, let's move on to another story. This is heartbreaking.
Well, we were bringing you news earlier about the number of migrants coming over the Channel. Record numbers so far already. News now, breaking news to bring you that a migrant has died trying to cross the English Channel. The RNLI has confirmed that it launched its all-weather lifeboat, and a group of migrants were brought to Dover in a border force boat on Friday morning. But what appeared to be a blue forensics tent could be seen outside the lifeboat's station. It's not yet known exactly how many migrants have arrived today. But in a statement, the RNLI has said that the all-weather lifeboat was tasked by the HM Coast Guard at 8:15 this morning to an incident in the Channel. The death comes after more than 700 migrants have crossed the Channel on Tuesday, in the highest number of arrivals on a single day so far this year.
So why isn't there a motivation to end this by creating safe routes? Create a safe route, and then people don't need to cross the Channel in this way. Labour is talking about having a one-in, one-out system. I've covered this already in a video, but and once again, I'm not an advocate for this. I think a proper safe route for people to come to the UK is much better, and it would avoid people losing their lives in the sea. What you're going to hear from Reform UK, if they bother to respond to this without cheering it on, is they'll say, well, the problem is there isn't enough of a disincentive. There needs to be a deterrent. We need to force people back This is the response you're going to hear from the Conservatives and Reform UK. What needs to be taking place is a safe route. Now, as I said, Labour have this idea of one in, one out. And how would that work? Well, what would happen is people who would cross the channel in a small boat will be picked up, returned to France, and then somebody who has, they say, a legitimate connection to Britain, like family member or whatever, they would be able to cross the channel by ferry or whatever without actually having to cross the channel in a small boat. So this would damage the business model of the smugglers, and it should reduce the number of people crossing the channel and therefore reduce the number of people losing their lives in the channel. Stu, thank you so much for that super chat. Why were you at my local Comic-Con last Sunday? What? I don't remember that. Why was I at it, or why was I not at it? Max, have you been watching the movie Official Secrets? No, I haven't seen that. I must check it out. There were no small boat crossings until 2018. Theresa May created this with the hostile environment policy. Yes. Well, what was happening before? And then Brexit really helped the situation, didn't it? Because there was the returns policy, or the Dublin Convention, but that's no longer the case. But this hostile environment was, of course, we don't come here, we don't want you here. I keep saying people are going to come because they have friends, family, they have connections, they speak the language, they have some sort of connection to Britain. So of course they're going to try and cross it. They don't want to stay in France. So it just makes sense to create a route for people to cross the channel safely, process the claim, and then if they have no right to stay in the country, then they get deported. But not creating a safe route creates another route. The government must know this. Is it a political game they're playing? What we're going to do is we're going to put people in a situation where they have to cross the channel this way, because if we create safe routes, then we're seen as soft on immigration or something. Kavanaugh, thank you so much for that. Peach. I think it's a peach. Anyway, let's move on to this story. This is very interesting. Let me bring it up on your screen. The New Statesman was asked a question about a possible coalition at the next election.
Let's get to some listener questions. Given the current political landscape, do you think there will be another coalition government in 2029? And would the UK benefit from switching to a proportional representation system rather than first past the post?
So I think it's quite possible that we have quite dramatic shifts at the next election. Remember that the last election, the result was very much sort of product of our bizarre electoral system. Labour won this giant majority, but on a very small vote share. And it looks as though running into the next election in England, we're going to have potentially four parties, not that different from each other, and lots of very strange local contests. And that's one of the things that's making sort of political strategists, I think, probably lose some sleep, which contests they have to be focusing on. So I think running into that, it's going to be a bit of a pollster nightmare. That's good. Might need to give the pollsters something to think about rather than a sort of slam dunk and just how big is the majority going to be. Whether we get a coalition, I think, is interesting. There are alternative arrangements. We saw that with Theresa May in 2017 when she opted for that thing called a confidence and supply agreement with the Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionists. That's another possibility that you do a more limited deal. We've seen Nicola Sturgeon govern in Scotland with a minority, probably harder to do. In Westminster, you might not want to have to negotiate all your legislative programme item by item in quite the same way. I think one of the things that was really interesting, though, with our electoral system, it comes on to the second part, is we saw the Liberal Democrats get absolutely hammered to bits in 2015. There's a general rule about coalition governments that the junior partner in coalitions does quite badly at the subsequent election, and particularly if you don't have the protection of proportional representation or some alternative electoral system, you are very, very vulnerable. And that's why the Liberal Democrats saw their representation in Parliament reduced from 50, 60 to under 10 or wherever they went. I mean, it was...
Okay, so is there going to be a coalition government at the next election? Probably. It's looking more and more likely that Labour's massive majority that they won at this election is going to be reduced dramatically. Now, of course, there are a number of factors that have to be considered. Is the economy going to improve? Are people going to see the benefits of that growing economy? Because one thing is growing the economy, another thing is convincing people that they're better off. Why don't people retire anymore? That's a big issue. Because they can't afford to retire. That's a massive problem. Yeah, Elon gave Kentamine a bad name. Yes. Yet the DUP worked out really well, didn't it? Yes, it did. Oh my goodness, the DUP, the dumbest party in Europe. Maybe worse than Reform. Anyway, back to this idea of a coalition. Yeah, I agree with the point raised in the clip there about how it's really bad for the coalition partner. It doesn't work out very well for them at the following election because people. See, the thing about a coalition is that generally there isn't the idea of the coalition before the election. What happens is, especially under first past the post. So what happens is you end up having a coalition after, because people didn't, the ones who voted for the Conservatives in 2010 were not voting for a coalition government with the Liberal Democrats. So they were not happy with the Liberal Democrats. And the people who voted for the Liberal Democrats were not happy that they were in bed with the Conservatives. And especially as the junior partner, unless it's on a knife edge, has very little leverage over the bigger party. So coalitions work better under proportional representation, but terribly under first past the post. And I think this is something that could be a problem for Reform if they consider going into a coalition with the Conservatives. Because if the Conservatives are the bigger party, which they would likely be, then and Reform are the smaller one, well, Reform will have very little control over the Conservatives, and they're not going to be given senior positions in the government. They may be given some junior positions or some crappy jobs, crappy departments, but they're not going to be given huge amounts of power because the bigger party would not go along with that. The MPs in the bigger party wouldn't go along with that. But then who's going to join a party if you don't have power? So unless Reform do really well, I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I'm skeptical about all of this polling that shows that Reform will become the biggest party or going to eclipse the Labour Party, because we're very early into all of this. There are 4 years left before we have another election, probably 4 years. And there's a lot of things that Labour can do between now and then. Now, I honestly don't understand why Labour have not been pushing more about the NHS. They brought down the NHS waiting list, and we saw one clip online about that. Why were they not talking more about bringing down the NHS waiting list? This is so important for so many people. Cost of living, they in a way take with one hand and give it with the other. But where it's something positive, they should be pumping that out all the time. Not that I agree with what they're doing, but from a political point of view, from a strategic point of view, Labour are making a real arse out of it, because there's things that they're doing well, like the NHS waiting list, and they're not talking about it. And they could talk about it and use it as a tool to say, look, we're bringing down the NHS waiting list. This means that we're going to have more people going into work. People will not have to wait so long. People are going to get healthier because they won't have to wait for treatment. All of these things, they could spin it really positively, but they're hardly mentioning it. Instead, they're talking about immigration, which doesn't benefit Labour at all. In Australia, the Conservative parties are in a formal coalition, as it's the only way they can challenge Labour. UK could have a Tory Reform coalition after the general election, especially with first past the post. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to happen here, but definitely it's a case where they could have a coalition, but it depends on how big Reform, how many seats they win. Because if they're pretty small, then it's not really going to benefit Reform at all. And Farage wants power, or at least influence, significant influence over power. He wants to be the kingmaker, if not the king. But I still think it's too early. It's too early in the day to be talking about what the result will be. We have to wait another few years, because look at what Donald Trump is doing. This is something I was really upset about when Rachel Reeves was like, "Yeah, don't worry. What we're going to do is we're going to plan our budget for growth." And I said, how many times did I say, what if something comes along? This was last year. And I said, what if something comes along that damages that growth? You can't predict the future. Something could come along that could damage your growth. That's why it's so important to have a backup plan, a B plan. Tax the rich, have a wealth tax, something like that. A backup. And then what happened? Donald Trump got elected and he imposed his tariffs, which is going to create we haven't felt the impact of the tariffs yet. Or if we have, it's in a very limited way. The real hit is going to come soon, as the cost filters down, because many people, business owners or countries were anticipating the tariffs. So what they did was they bought in advance. They filled up their stocks. Now, as those inventories dwindle, and they have to start purchasing more stuff from China or wherever, it's going to become really expensive and they're going to go bust. So we haven't seen the real impact of the tariffs yet. Will you cover, maybe now or in the video, an interview between Conor McGregor and Tucker Carlson? I apologize for the off-topic question. I'll have a look for the video, and then I'll see about doing a response to it not during the live stream. I'd need to see the video first, because if there's something extremely controversial, I have to be careful, just for the rules of YouTube. Any good backup would be a member of the EU. Yes, the UK should be. And this is another thing. This is another thing that Labour should be doing. They should be blaming Brexit and Donald Trump for all of their problems. Now, is it true that all of their problems are down to Donald Trump and Brexit? No, but wouldn't stop the Tories from doing it. I'm not saying to be dishonest, but they could use it a bit more, okay? Don't be dishonest, Noah, but you could use it a bit more, because a lot of problems are down to Brexit and Donald Trump. But instead, they're not talking about Brexit, and they're saying, well, with Donald Trump, we're not happy about the tariffs, but we want to have a good relationship with him. But you can't have a relationship with Donald Trump. I keep saying this. Meloni went to meet with Donald Trump yesterday and came back in empty-handed. I knew she would come back empty-handed. I'm not Nostradamus, but I knew that Donald Trump, you can't do a deal with him. The Japanese, I'll probably do a video on that tomorrow. A group of Japanese politicians, not diplomats and civil servants, went to meet with Trump, and they came back and they were pretty upset because they were treated with nothing but contempt. There was extortion. Trump was trying to extort something from them. They were extremely upset. So Donald Trump has managed to make Japanese people very angry, and he's made the Canadians very angry. Two groups of people who generally, you don't want to see very angry. And Trump has managed to do that. But it's like night following day. You go and grovel to Donald Trump, he doesn't give a shit about you. And this is what we're probably going to see with this so-called trade deal between the UK and the US. I hope I'm wrong, okay? And if I'm wrong, I'll come out and say it. But I don't see him doing a trade deal with the UK. He just wants to be flattered. He just wants his arse kissed. And because he doesn't care about trade deals. This is about forcing other countries to buy American stuff, so he can sell this to the public. See, they're buying American stuff now. Joe Biden, when he was in charge, they weren't buying our stuff. Now they're buying our stuff. I think this is what he wants. But we can't buy American stuff if there's no market for it. There's no market, or very little of a market, in Europe or in the UK for 8-litre V12 gas guzzlers that you can't park or you can't turn in a car park. There's no real market for those. There's no market for chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef. So what Trump is selling, nobody wants to buy. And this is his problem, or this is the problem, that you can go there and you can try and negotiate and say, yeah, well, what we'll do is we'll lower our tariffs or whatever. No, he just wants you to buy American stuff. American beef is beautiful. Yes, it is. People haven't got the energy to open up the can of worms of Brexit and all the divisions that go along with it. I'm not saying that they need to start talking about rejoining the European Union or say, look, we need to renegotiate Brexit, but they could blame it. And it would be true. We can't sell into the EU because of X, Y, and Z, but why are X, Y, and Z a problem? Because of Brexit. Because we left the European Union. But instead what you hear from Labour is, well, people voted in 2016 and we have to respect that vote. But that's not an answer. Beautiful materials, beautiful minerals, cars, chucks, letters. Our chicken is full of vitamin bird flu. I saw a clip today about I think it was Vosh who was saying about he was shocked that chicken, for example, in Europe is sold raw. It's like, what? Yes, because we have standards where we don't have salmonella. If there's an outbreak of salmonella, there's I don't know when the last one was, but we have very high standards. And this is one of the reasons why you don't see so many outbreaks or people ending up in hospital. It's much more common in the US. And now what the US government want to do is defund the FDA, the Federal Department for Food Safety or something like that. It's just getting madder and madder. Anyway, guys, let's take a short comedy moment and we'll be back in just a jiffy with more serious stuff. Hope you enjoy this. It's an old one, but it's a good one. If it loads.
Welcome to Broken News. The Guinness Book of World Records has named Britain's cleverest person. And in what may come as a surprise to many, it's the outspoken MP, Lee Anderson. Our reporter has more.
Known for his strident views on immigrants, travellers and the death penalty, Mr Anderson appears to be a bacon-faced mouth breather with about as much going on behind the thick plating of his stupid skull as an old bag of cement gone hard. Yet, despite being so openly and stultifyingly dense that he could give lead a run for its money, Mr Anderson somehow wangled himself an 80 grand job as an MP by convincing people in one part of Nottinghamshire that he's one of them. A former coal miner who supported Arthur Scargill, Dennis Skinner and Tony Benn back in the 80s, Mr Anderson changed tack when he saw there was bare money to be made in fostering societal division and by calling everything in his life that he doesn't like woke gone mad. The 57-year-old oversized Subbuteo figurine and fridge-framed school bully once said he hated the idea of MPs taking second jobs. Then at the earliest opportunity took a 100 grand a year contract with GB News. He repeatedly backed losers in Tory leadership elections and says that human rights campaigners make him sick. Well, scientists say his actions show the equivalent intellectual reasoning of a special needs turkey that's just been on the sharp end of a frontal lobotomy. And Mr Anderson joins the ranks of fellow mono-brain-celled meatbags Nadine Dorries, Andrea Jenkins and Brendan Clark-Smith, who are thick as big donkey dicks, yet somehow end up representing British voters. Back to you.
Wolf and Gladiators, thank you. Well, in a statement released a few moments ago, the Guinness Book of World Records said, despite his fairly obvious shortcomings in the brainial region, his ability to get caught out faking a door knock, and thinking you can feed a full-grown human for 7 pence, Mr Anderson has thrived. And there can be no other explanation for this other than he's some sort of secret genius. What a lovely story. That's all from Broken News. You're up to date.
Oh my goodness, I couldn't stop laughing through that. It's an old one, but it checks out. Speaking of Lee Anderson, Reform, not Labour, are Britain's true workers' party. This is from Stephen Pollard at the Telegraph. Unfortunately, I can't read the whole article because it's behind a paywall, but we can see at the very beginning it says, for all that it seems to have come as a surprise to many supposedly sophisticated political observers, the least aspect of the not-so renationalisation of British Steel has Nigel Farage called for government... Okay, whatever. Look, is Reform UK a left-wing party? No, because there are two ways of selling nationalisation. One is a left-wing way, and the other is a right-wing way. And what Reform UK are, of course, selling is... Look, I don't believe they actually believe in nationalisation, but if they were to believe in nationalisation, it would be the right-wing way. Well, this should be run by the state. We are in charge. We run it, basically. We get to fire and hire whoever we want, and we don't have to... it should not be in the hands of private individuals. This would be the right-wing way of approaching nationalisation. Well, the left-wing way is, well, it should be in the common good. It's part of our society. It should be run for the people, by the people. And it should be there to... It shouldn't be in the hands of private companies, because they will profit from this. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be a profit-making operation. And I buy into this as well. It should be, for example, sorry about that. It's the same with water. It should be the same with the railways. There are some things that it makes more sense to be in the hands of private companies, like mobile phones, stuff like that, certain technologies. But when we're talking about core aspects of society like water, housing, infrastructure, also steel, because in many cases you need the steel to build the infrastructure. It's not good if a private company is benefiting at the expense of the taxpayer for that. But I love this idea that Reform UK are somewhat left-wing. Oh my God, they don't care about workers. This is about control. They don't care about... Why would they, if they cared about British workers, why did they vote against a bill or a measure in Parliament not that long ago that would have strengthened worker protections? Reform UK voted against that. How are they a left-wing party? How are they on the side of workers, on the side of trade unions? They're not. They're very good at convincing people that they are, unfortunately. Farage is very good at cosplaying as... You name it, and he will cosplay as it. Guy down the pub, village idiot. He'll cosplay as a state owner, whatever, city trader, whatever you want. He will cosplay as that, and he'll convince people that he's one of them. He talks the talk. He's very charismatic. He's good at what he does. He's full of shite, but he's good at it. Is reform the left wing? Then Longford exists as capital of Ireland. Yes, that's true. Water supply is vulnerable to attack and should definitely be brought under state control. Yes, especially in this period where we have many countries around the world that want to engage in cyber warfare, and disrupting the water supply is one way. Disrupting electricity, this is another reason why the infrastructure should be in state hands, should not be under the control of private companies. For the sake of, there shouldn't be a profit-driven motivation when it comes to water or for electricity infrastructure. But also, as was pointed out, for security reasons, it makes sense to keep it in state hands. He worked in metals, as a commodities trader. Yes, my goodness, that was good. Yeah, he worked in metals. Anyway, let's move on to our next story. Oh my goodness. Okay, I wanted to show you this because sticking a bit with Reform UK for a moment. Leaving the European Convention on Human Rights.
actually seen these struggles this week when Nigel Farage has been out and about on the campaign trail, and he's got a very clear, but I would say simplistic solution, which is say, we'll leave the ECHR and that will solve everything. And I think that's a white elephant to look at that approach, because the fact is, it may be we need to look at elements of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, and how it's applied to illegal migration, but saying to do this, and the problem will go...
Okay, this argument actually is worse than Nigel Farage's, let's just leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Because what you do is, instead of actually shutting down that stupid argument, because it doesn't make any sense, what you're doing is, as you hear from these conservatives, this guy he's a conservative, Sebastian Payne. What they do is they lend credence to the idea that there's a problem. Farage saying we need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, the response should be, no, we shouldn't. It's fine. It's there to protect people's rights. If you have a problem with it, then that's your problem. But there's no justification for leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, what I mean by it's worse than it's worse when you hear these Tories say, well, it needs to be reformed. But what reform? What they're doing is they're saying that there's a problem with it. So you open the door for Farage to say, see, there's another person on board that says there's a problem, so we need to leave it. These people are not interested in actually reform because they don't understand what the reform they're talking about. They're just trying to appeal to some sort of middle ground. But there isn't a middle ground. Nigel Farage, Robert Jenrick and others want to take away people's protections. They'll say about, well, no, we don't want to get rid of your protection. We want to have a British Bill of Rights. Look at what's happening in the United States. Donald Trump is not respecting the Bill of Rights. He's not respecting the Constitution. So if Donald Trump is not doing it, where can you go then? See, at least in the UK, if Nigel Farage was Prime Minister and he wasn't respecting the Constitution, he wasn't respecting the Bill of Rights, he wasn't respecting whatever was in charge, replacing the ECHR, then you're in serious trouble. Because what do you do then? At least if you have the ECHR, there's someone you can go to. You can go above the British government. You can go above the Supreme Court. It's important to remember that the ECHR is not some sort of button that you press. Oh, I don't like this situation, press the ECHR. It doesn't work like that. You have to exhaust the courts within the state first. You have to go through all the courts, the Supreme Court, go through a number of appeals, and then at that stage can you go to the European Convention, European Court of Human Rights. It's not a one-stop shop, or it's not some first approach to a problem. It's always the last, and there's a reason for that. Ivan, thanks so much for that super chat. The Telegraph are crazy now. I've just been a fan. I've never been a fan. However, it used to be quite a bit more refined. Now it's just really badly written comic. Yes, it is. It's. I think over the last number of years, especially Brexit, I think Brexit really broke the Telegraph, because maybe before they were supportive of the Conservatives, but the type of Conservatives you had before Brexit were, I'm not going to say more moderate. We had, David Cameron and George Osborne, the guy who was responsible for austerity. But politics was different, or it felt different. So the newspapers were, of course, picking a side, and the conservative pro-Tory newspapers would always pick the Tories. But they weren't so comical about it. They weren't so sycophantic about it. Jacob Rees-Mogg says on GBBs, David Cameron tried to say that he would reform the EU, other 27 member countries. Yes, this is part of the problem with Brexit as well. This idea that, the European Union isn't great, we'll reform it. Instead of actually being pro-European, and this is, you had two movements. You had one who wanted to leave, and you had another who says, well, it's not great, but maybe we should stick around and try and fix a few things around the edges. That was the problem. You didn't actually have a pro-European movement, front and center. You had pro-European movements during the Brexit campaign, but the main ones were the ones who wanted to leave, and the others who said, well, it's a bit crap, but don't worry, it's better to be in, even though it's crap. That's not an incentive for people to vote to remain. Slightly civilized. It's since the Barclay brothers took it over. Yes, it's just become like the Daily Mail. Has Farage held any surgeries yet? What do you mean, David Amos style surgeries? He's a man with a target on his back. You can't expect him, to do. Isn't it strange? Thanks, Kevin. Isn't it strange that he keeps saying, "I can't meet with the public," and then he does these walkabouts, meeting the public, photo opportunities with the public. He doesn't have going into pubs, meeting the public. But he says, no, I can't meet the public in my surgery because that's dangerous. Okay. Yes, he doesn't give a crap about the people of his constituency. And unfortunately, the people who voted for him will vote for him again because they're stupid. Sorry, I'm sorry to say that, but if at this stage you think that Nigel Farage cares about you, then you don't have a functioning brain. I'm sorry. It wasn't crap. The EU invested millions. No, I'm saying that the Remain campaign was terrible. You had the status quo, and I think many people voted against the Remain campaign because it represented the status quo. You had David Cameron, the Prime Minister. I keep coming back to this point. It should have been an independent body set up to present information to the public. The politicians should not have got involved. It should not have been done in that way. It should have been like what happens in Switzerland. Don't get the politicians should not be involved in referendums like this. I disagree also when even though I agreed with the outcome, the result of some of the referendum that were in Ireland, I still think politicians should not be getting involved. They should keep as far away from this as possible. The people who should be talking about what's happening in regards to a referendum should be experts. People who actually know what they're talking about. Politicians generally don't know what they're talking about. Brexit is very similar to what's happening in the US today, yes. It's very much like Brexit, imposing economic sanctions upon yourself. Anyway, let's move on to our next story. This is... my goodness. So this is from the Canary. No, there was another story. I think it was from... the Big Issue. I wanted to show you this one from the Big Issue. Is similar to the one from the Canary, but the Big Issue revealed 1.3 million people with cancer, arthritis, and more could lose PIP under Labour's benefit cuts. Thousands of people with cancer, cardiovascular disease, and respiratory diseases, and more than 200,000 people with arthritis, and among 1.3 million people who could be rendered ineligible for the daily living personal independence payment (PIP) payment by the government's disability benefit plans, according to official data. Data published by the Department of Work and Pensions this week in response to a Freedom of Information request from disability right campaigner Martin Bonner revealed that 87% of the 1.283 million working age people currently receiving the standard living PIP payment scored less than 4 points in each of the 10 categories in the PIP assessment, meaning that they would no longer qualify for the daily living PIP benefit. So revealed that 87% of working age people currently receiving the PIP payment scored less than the 4 points necessary. 87%. A further 13% of the 1,608,000 working age claimants received the higher enhanced daily living PIP payment would also fall foul of the planned changes, given a total of 1.325 million current PIP claimants would be rendered ineligible by the DWP proposals. See, you know what's the big problem also here is this was received under a Freedom of Information request. Why is this information behind a barrier? Why is this information not freely available? Why is it necessary to pay, because you need to pay for a Freedom of Information request? Why is it necessary to pay for this information? Why are journalists not accessing this information? Why is the government not broadcasting this information? Culling. Like, this is insane. The government's plans published last month in a DWP Green Paper are set to be voted on by MPs this summer without any formal public consultation. Why was there no public consultation? Why were charities and organisations representing the disabled not informed, or not part of the consultation? Sparking a furious backlash from disability activists and some Labour MPs. If they were approved by Parliament, the changes would apply to new applicants from November 2026, and from then on will affect existing claimants when their claim is reviewed. Frakapani, thanks so much for that. Cutting benefits for the disabled is a false economy. As they become more and more, as they become even more, more will. As a result, it'll cost the taxpayer more in the long run, in the long term, yes. Sorry, I messed up that response there. It is a false economy because what you do is you just shift the cost somewhere else. So if you cut support for people, many disabled people rely on PIP to actually work. So if you cut the PIP, if you make it more difficult for them to access the PIP, then they're less likely to be able to work. So you actually end up not saving money. I said before, if you put people into dire straits where they're okay now, they're getting by, even though they are disabled. If you put them in a desperate situation, they may end up having to go into hospital. That's a false economy. That's a cost being moved around. Why are they doing this? You don't pay for a Freedom of Information request if you keep it tight and targeted. It's a kitchen sink Freedom of Information request that attract fees. Okay, thanks for that clarification, Chatty Rat. That's good to know. But why is it a charity campaigner? Sorry, is a disability campaigner who had to make this Freedom of Information request? Why is it Martin Bonner who's doing this? Why aren't journalists doing this? But this is. It goes on to say, we're deeply disappointed that this Labour government is repeating past mistakes, proposing exactly the kind of reforms that previously caused deprivation and despair in the disabled community, while failing to save the government money because of the knock-on effects on health and social care budgets. Taking money away from the disabled people does not mean our needs go away. PIP is the main disability benefit in England, Wales and Northern Ireland and is not restricted by income or work status. And this is another thing we keep hearing. Well, we need to modify, we need to reform PIP, we need to force more people off it because we can get them into work. But it's not a work-related benefit. It's not dependent on work. This is why it's so frustrating to hear MPs talk and ministers talk about PIP in relation to work, because they're separate. Do they not understand this? Or are they trying to sell a narrative of, well, it's about getting people into work, and the public may be in a situation where they don't understand what PIP is about, and we can basically lie to them Because that's what you're doing. If you know something is not true and you tell people who don't know, then we call that lying and misleading. Nothing more terrifying than being vulnerable, disabled and poor. It's a fear that never goes away. You carry it everywhere like additional punishment for all your worst fears being pushed on you. I'm sorry to hear that. It's true, Angie. This will put more pressure on the NHS. It will. Because if people are not getting... If people's standard of living decreases because they have been moved off PIP, then they're going to end up in the NHS. It's like night following day. No restrictions on the rich. We keep calling for a wealth tax. Is a wealth tax going to solve all problems? Of course not. It's not a panacea. It's not going to fix every problem. But it would be a step in the right direction. There are things like equalizing capital gains tax with income tax. The government could do that tomorrow. Why don't they do that? On disability welfare cuts, write to your MPs, go on demonstrations if you can, and submit to the consultation on the Green Paper, even though they're not consulting on everything. Well said, Ivan. Yes, I keep saying a letter to your MP. Try and organise with people. If you're disabled, try to organise with other disabled people in your constituency to get on Facebook, get on social media, try and organise something something focused. Thanks, Ivan, and once again, and bombard your MP with letters, with emails, demanding that they meet with you, that you meet with organisations that represent the disabled, and that they vote against these measures. I keep saying marches and demonstrations are important, but MPs are more likely to listen to letters than they are to listen to people at demonstrations. And a big problem for the disabled is that they are less likely to vote because of their disabilities. It's not a criticism, in no way whatsoever. Just unfortunately, they're less likely to vote. But MPs don't know that whether you're voting or not. So even if you're not able to vote, if you're not able to get out to vote, try and convince your MP to vote a particular way when it comes to these measures, to vote against them. But it has to be organised. But unfortunately, the government the Labour Party are supposed to be there to look after the most vulnerable. The party of working people, okay, but also the party of the welfare state. And the welfare state was set up to protect the most vulnerable. Max, my MP tech whiz kid Peter Kyle's office doesn't respond to me emails. I've sent one. I'm not this lively all the time. Okay. Try and organize with other people in the constituency. Go on Facebook and ask people, look, have you sent him an email to Peter Kyle's? He's supposed to respond. His MPs are supposed to respond, even if it's just a boilerplate, standard response. But they're supposed to respond. You could even write a letter. I don't know if you can afford to do that because, when it comes to time and money, but letters are another way. They're supposed to respond to these things. There's MPs are supposed to respond in some form. So maybe, I don't know when you sent the letter or sent the email, but maybe you just need to give it a bit more time, or maybe call the surgery, or if you can, go down to the surgery, find out when it's open, and quiz the people there. Why didn't I receive a response? 4 months. Then if I were you, I'd go down to the surgery whenever it's open next time and ask, look, I sent emails, I haven't received a response. Why haven't I received a response? MPs get a significant expense account, okay, to cover these things. So there's no reason why they don't respond. It's around the corner. I'll introduce myself. Very good. Good. So guys, we're almost at the end of the stream. I just want to cover one final thing before we go. flags. Have a listen to it. So this is not a really serious story, but I always love where Tories and people on the right start complaining about, hey, our sovereignty, our culture. You know, we're almost at Easter, so people are angry over Easter eggs or lack of Easter being mentioned or something like that.
A rallying cry from Andrew Rossendale.
And quite rightly true, and quite rightly too. You know, the way our culture is being erased salami slice by salami slice over the last 10, 20 years is absolutely disgusting. You know, and if we're talking about religion, you know, it was Richard Dawkins who said that to understand Western civilization, you would first have to read the Bible. You know, the birthplace of Western civilization is two cities, Athens and Jerusalem. Now, our Judeo-Christian heritage goes back 5,000, 6,000 years in principle. And,
sorry, but in the Bible there is slavery. It advocates for slavery, so I'm not sure which Bible this guy is reading.
Well, and when we sort of have to compromise our whole culture because of mass immigration, and this mass immigration is something we never asked for. If I can reference the work of Dr. Marcus Collins, who's a cultural historian.
So we've moved from the Bible to mass immigration in just a few seconds. I don't know how he made that jump, but okay.
He looks at opinion polls from the 1950s to 1985. And they're very, very similar to the ones that they are today. 70% of people oppose mass immigration. That's unbroken 70-odd years.
Yes, but what people... See, you get people to answer a question on anything you want. you get whatever response, whatever way you phrase the question. But we always see in these types of surveys that as soon as you start asking more specific questions, like, are you against immigrants? Yes, I'm against immigrants. Okay. Are you against using immigrants to work in the NHS? Then the number of people who are against immigration when it comes to, you know, filling spaces in the NHS drops dramatically. Then you say, okay, well, what about farming? Should we ban immigration when it comes to farming? The number, of course, drops as well. Then you add social care. So you start adding, you know, areas that need immigration, and the number of people who are against immigration drops. But then if you go back to, are you against immigration? Yes, I'm against immigration. So these statistics are meaningless because people are always against something, and then it works the other way as well. Are people upset with Brexit? Yes. Do they want to rejoin the European Union? Yes. Are you willing to accept the euro? No. Are you willing to accept the ECJ? No. Are you willing to accept this, that, and the other? No. And then, so the number of people who are supportive of rejoin, people's opinions change when you add a bit of detail.
Of Brits being against immigration. We were never asked. It's been rammed down our throats.
So, Dave, what would you say to people?
We were never asked. What were people supposed to be asked? Businesses want immigrants. That's where we get growth. Exactly. If you don't, this guy. I'm sorry. You know. Oops. This guy. He's probably close to retirement, or he's already retired. You know who's paying his pension? Young people today, and a lot of those young people are immigrants. So if he says we don't want immigrants, we should get rid of them, okay, then get rid of your pension as well. Because pensions generally, unless they're private pensions, generally pensions are paid by the people who are working today. It's not a case of, you know, I paid in and then I claim the money back. It doesn't really work like that. It works more like the people who are paying in today are paying the pensions of today. So in the same way as in the past, you know, when you were working, you were paying the pensions of the people who were drawing those pensions back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, whatever. No mention of Universal Studios, Luton, Bedford. I mentioned it on in one of my videos, so I'm not sure if that's directed at me. Foreigners, no. Women, no. Getting an education, no. Doctors, no. Easter eggs dropping like shares tonight. Pub philosopher vibes, yes. Oh my goodness. So, these people are always angry, but they're not sure exactly what they're angry about. They're just angry about immigrants. But then as soon as you ask them, look, do you want Should we get rid of all the doctors? No. Don't get rid of the doctors. Dentists? No. Engineers? No. People who pick fruit? No. People who work in your pub? No. I love those foreigners, wonderful people. It's the other ones we want to get rid of. That's it's always, and unfortunately, one of the things that people realized when they voted for Brexit was, no, it's not. I wanted to send those people, not those people, not the people who I work with. I didn't want to send them back to Eastern Europe or wherever, or Southern Europe. It wasn't those people. No, it was the other ones, the ones that I read about in the Daily Mail or the Express. So guys, we're almost at the end. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who came on tonight. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for your super chats. And thanks to the moderators for doing a wonderful job as always. Before we finish, we have our one for the road. So hope you enjoy this clip. And I will bid you a good weekend.
So we know that the two really big issues for voters these days is number 1, the economy, number 2, immigration.
Right, so how do we fix the economy?
Rachel's on it.
How's it going?
Let's put a pin in that.
To see if it's still alive?
So it's our job to think about immigration. People are worried. What do we do?
Well, we could make the positive case for it and point out that as an ageing population, we really need...
No. That's basically telling people that they're wrong to care about it.
Well, it's making a positive case.
No, you can't make an economic case for immigration.
I can.
No, I mean you can't and then expect the voters to vote for us.
Which voters are we talking about?
Well, of course we're talking about hero voters.
Hero voters?
Yes, those plucky heroes who once voted for us, then voted for the Tories, then changed their mind and voted for us again. But the worry is they might change their mind again.
So why are they heroes?
Because they don't mind changing their minds.
They have no principles.
No, they're heroic. They live in marginal seats and they care about immigration. What do we do?
I guess we could fix the asylum system, increase house building and improve services so people don't feel under so much pressure.
Yeah, we're trying to do all that. But we've also got to look tough.
On immigration.
On immigrants, yes. Because if we don't, then people will vote for reform.
So we're focused on people who are thinking about voting reform.
Yes, finally you get it.
Oh, I see. Well, why don't we just tell people that reform's ideas are simplistic and unworkable, not to mention horrific, and also point out that their big idea of Brexit has just made everything worse?
Oh, no, you don't get it. No, none of that. You absolutely can't do any of that. You cannot tell voters they got it wrong.
We could campaign on making the electoral system fairer so this one group of voters don't have disproportionate influence.
No more referendums, please.
Then what do you suggest we do?
We explain that reform's ideas are basically fine, they're just a bit extreme, and we'll do them in a more sensible way.
So we're a kind of diluted version of reform?
Well, no, I wouldn't...
Since when has anyone wanted a diluted version of something rather than the full-strength version? I mean, if they're really anti-immigration, won't they just vote for the really anti-immigration people, not just people pretending to be?
But we're not pretending. We really believe it. Look at these Facebook adverts we just put out, celebrating all the people we've deported.
Is that the same blue that Reform uses?
Yes, we're so like Reform, we'll even use their colours.
Won't it just make people think it's an advert for Reform?
Not if they read it carefully.
Does anyone read anything carefully on the internet?
Fair point.
And look, even if you did manage to persuade a few of the reform-curious people that we're really tough on immigration, won't that just put off loads of our left-leaning voters?
Well, they're not heroes.
What?
And anyway, who are they going to vote for instead?
The Lib Dems, the Greens, the SNP, Plaid Cymru?
Exactly, they're not serious threats. They don't have a Nigel Farage.
I thought you hated Nigel Farage.
I do.
So why are you copying him?
Because if history's taught me anything, it's that the only way to deal with the far right is to copy their policies, pander to their voters, and give them almost exactly what they want, because then they'll be very happy and leave us alone.
Where did you study history?
Trump University.
So guys, have a great weekend. I'll see you on Tuesday, same bad time, same bad channel. Stay safe, take care, and good night.